Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Warriors podcast. This is a great one, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. But first of all, if you are interested in supporting the Mental Health Warriors podcast, if you listen to it and you just absolutely fucking love it, then share the episodes. That would be such a huge help. So just click share on Facebook, share it on LinkedIn, Twitter, all the social media. You can email people the link. But if you help us get our message out, it helps us help more people. And that's really what this is all about. I love getting feedback on the shows. Get just so much positive feedback. I get some constructive criticism too, and that's all part of it. Helps us get better here, helps me improve my performance as a, conversationalist, I would call it, and I always welcome it. And the other way you can share it is or support the show rather, is by going over to Patreon and patreon.com/mentalhealthwarriors and supporting the show there. And I appreciate it. It means a lot to me. And it means a lot to me that you're loving what we're doing here and that it's making a difference. That's really what it's all about. So this episode is really, really important. And the reason it's important is because, weirdly, I can't believe how many people I talk to. It's kind of like the conversation I released yesterday with Josiah Novak about fitness, where people ask me, how much does being fit have to do with my mental health? Kind of a lot. The same thing with nutrition, probably even more so, actually. And I can't believe how many people I see saying, I've been eating, I'm really down on myself and I'm eating peanut butter sandwiches every night. And fuck, I wonder if that has anything to do with why I feel so shitty. Like, man, I love peanut butter as much as the next person, but yeah, it matters. What you put into your body matters. How you feel about what you put into your body matters. And that's why I'm so excited to share this particular show with you, because I have a friend of mine on, Adrian Chavez, who is like this crazy, incredible nutritional guru. And we talk about so many cool things in this podcast, and he has so many wicked insights. We talk a lot about digestion, about, the gut microbiome and how important that is to optimal health. We talk tons about inflammation, how to, eat an anti-inflammatory diet. What are the things that cause inflammation and brain injuries? I mean, we talk about all kinds of interesting things, but it's critical because we all have the power to make some small changes in our diet and our nutrition that make a powerful and significant difference in our lives. And so many of us just aren't conscious of that. We're not conscious of how to eat more optimally for our own bodies. And this is something that's taken me a lifetime to get to. And don't get me wrong, I love a Dairy Queen chocolate dipped ice cream cone as much as the next person. Probably actually way more than the next person, but it's in moderation, right? So I take my nutrition pretty seriously. I eat a ridiculous amount of fermented foods, kombucha, all that kind of stuff. But listen, Adrian's interview, our conversation rather, is important. So I want you to listen to it, and I want you to take some tips away, and I want you to take a deeper understanding of what are the causes of disease and what are some of the things that we can do about it today to make a difference. I think you're going to love the episode. Dr. Adrian Chavez is a functional medicine practitioner who focuses on helping people find the root causes of their health issues and address them with natural methods. He received his PhD in nutrition from Arizona State University and now produces a podcast called Your Nutrition Prescription, which, by the way, I highly recommend that you read. And he consults with people from all over the world and runs group programs online to help people get well, maximize their health and fitness, and live a long, high-quality life. You can find more about him at www.dradrianchavez.com. The doctor is Dr. So dradrianchavez.com. And that's it. So everybody, enjoy this episode and drink from the well of Adrian's wisdom and insight. It'll make your life better, and it'll make your life better really fucking fast. All right, guys, take care and enjoy the episode. We'll see you on the other side.
Warriors are not born. Warriors are forged in the crucible of adversity. Warriors without fear are warriors without courage. We are men, destroying stigma and stereotypes. We are a band of brothers, because in brotherhood there is strength. Our weapons are strength, empathy, and honesty. We are mental health warriors, and this is our voice.
Adrian, welcome to the Mental Health Warriors podcast, my friend.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we travel in some of the same online circles, and more people seem to be raving about what you're able to do for them. And I love the nutrition part of it. I think it's really an overlooked thing. And it's funny, as I get older, I get sort of more vegetarian and, just eat generally healthier. And I'm just really amazed at how many people like in our mental health warriors community will be like, hey, do you think how much does diet have to do with mental health? Quite a bit. So quite a bit. So maybe tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you got so passionate about this, and then we can get into the specifics of mental health and nutrition.
Oh wow! So my story is pretty interesting. So I started college. I was a sports player in high school. Really interested in the body and nutrition from a sports perspective, and that's what I did my undergrad in. I got my undergraduate degree in exercise science, and then when I was a master's student, I actually had a stomach ulcer, and I was sent to a couple of different doctors, GI specialists. They prescribed me some antibiotics, some proton pump inhibitors, and that actually made it worse. And so I felt just kind of helpless. And I was like, I understand a lot about the human body. I understand about a lot about nutrition. Let me see if I can dive into this topic and see if I can do anything for myself to be able to help the issue. So I did spend a couple of weeks doing research, started implementing some of the things that I learned, and within a couple of weeks, it was gone. All the symptoms are gone. I basically cured it within a couple of weeks after going from doctor to doctor for months. It was at that point where I realized that there was something that nutrition and natural health brought to the table that conventional medicine, the pharmaceutical based medicine, really didn't bring. And that was where I shifted. So at that point, I was doing my master's degree, exercise science. I had every intention of going on to do a PhD in exercise physiology. My goal was to work as the physiologist, sports trainer for a NBA team. I was really into basketball still, so that was like my goal. And then at that point, I was like, you know what? I've learned about the human body from a molecular level, studied nutrition, studied performance, and this just applies to being able to heal people. So I felt that was a much more worthy use of my life in a more fulfilling life mission. If I could really just like heal people rather than help people, improve performance and win games, then So I at that point shifted, and I'm an obsessive type of person. I always have been. So I read tons of books, had always read a lot of books at that point. And so just started reading in the topic, like how do we influence cancer rates? How do we influence diabetes? How do we influence all different sorts of different diseases from a natural nutritional perspective? I also use nutritional supplements as well to correct deficiencies, and just overall, just from a natural perspective.
That is so interesting. And it's funny as you're talking, so much of just the story and your philosophy, makes sense, which is, understanding or bracing the power that food has to heal us. But I wonder, do you find that people still actually, because we're so inundated, right, in the messages that we consume in the media, and we feel like medicines are the way to, treat the symptoms or manage the symptoms of disease or whatever. Do you find that people you still run into people who feel like the message that food can heal you sounds like quackery in some way?
Oh, 100% of the time. It's probably, my clients comprise a very small portion of the population, the people that are actually willing to reach out to me and, take on a natural perspective to, well, oftentimes it's out of desperation. It's because they've been on multiple medications for years and have only gotten worse. And they're like, well, I'll just give this a try. And that's the problem, is just because we live in a society where, you can't watch a television show without being advertised to on for a specific medication. We're kind of told, or we're kind of trained not to question our doctors. And I mean, doctors are great. They go into it for the right reasons for the most part. They're very
Hmm.
intelligent people. But when you give intelligent people one school of thinking, and they're trained on pharmaceuticals, they're not trained on nutrition, they're not trained on nutritional supplementation, they don't learn any of that stuff. And that's one thing that I think the general population really fails to understand. And but we are in a time today, luckily, with the spread of information, that people are actually starting to become more aware of this, and the amount of people who are open to this message and actually trying it out, getting results, sharing with friends, is increasing dramatically. So I think that over the next 20, 30 years, it's going to be a really big shift.
Yeah, I think so too. Because you're right. I mean, what we're doing is not working, and people are getting sicker. And I can see. And it's funny. Sometimes I'm not sure if it's the circles I travel, like how clear a picture, if at all, I have of where the mood of the public is shifting, or maybe it's just the circles I travel. Because most of the circles I travel in, it's got hippies and people love organic food and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if that's like a any kind of barometer for the general public, but I guess we'll see. Because what we're doing right now cannot continue. What I wanted to, I'm really looking forward to delving in here is the relationship between nutrition and mental and emotional health and well-being, and sort of some of the different factors that go into it, and also how we can use food and vitamins and minerals to treat it. So one of the things I know that we want to talk about is inflammation. And I think that is a really misunderstood phenomena. And and I know it causes devastating effects. And I just wanted to tell you, like, one of my power packed things I consume that actually sounds disgusting to say it out loud, but is coconut oil, turmeric, pepper, cinnamon, and I just warm it up and chug it. So I'm a huge fan of turmeric. But what is inflammation, and how do you see the relationship between that and mental health, say?
Okay, so I actually saw your video once on what you did in the morning, and I got to be honest, I was a little bit grossed out on it, but at the same time, I was like, "Wow, he's getting more nutrition than
Yeah,
most people are getting in a week in the morning." But yeah,
it
so
doesn't taste as good as a Big Mac. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you.
well, I mean, that's the thing is like we're competing. I'm competing against food companies that they are creating these products to be satisfying, to activate
Mhm.
reward systems in the brain, and that's come. And we'll talk about that in a second. But that's what the food's designed to do. Is it's addictive. It's almost like a drug in ways where in the way that it activates reward systems, causes the release of dopamine, and that's a problem. That's something that I'm up against. Is like, hey, I have to get you to eat more bland foods. My son doesn't understand it at all. He's like, dude, I want to eat crap. It makes me so much happier. But let's go ahead and touch on the inflammation part of it. So inflammation is a natural process. Okay, inflammation. I mean, as it sounds, it's like a fire. It's heat, swelling, and that's really a natural process that our body does in response to an injury. So let's say you bumped your knee, your body becomes inflamed, and that is an immune system response in order to repair that tissue. However, the problem is when inflammation gets out of hand, when it becomes chronic, when we are in a state of continuous immune system activation, and that's chronic inflammation that many people are dealing with, and that can have devastating effects on all areas of our body. It can cause but specifically it can cause a lot of effects in the brain. So one of the biggest sources of inflammation that can have psychological effects is brain injury, and this is becoming a lot more in the public eye, per se. So like the NFL thing where the concussions and the traumatic brain injury and how that's affecting NFL players after their career psychologically. That's happening. Yes, that's happening rampantly in NFL players, but that's also happening in the general population. There are also people who maybe bumped their head when they're a kid, and they've been dealing with inflammation in their brain due to damage that has never been fully repaired, throughout their life, and that could be affecting their production of neurotransmitters. That can be affecting the way that the brain is firing, and that's something that oftentimes is overlooked.
That is interesting. So, are you saying that you have a brain injury causes inflammation, and is it because people are not eating healing, like they're living a lifestyle and eating a diet that causes ongoing inflammation? Is that preventing the brain from healing?
Oh yeah, that's part of it. So let's say you have a brain injury and you need so in order to repair the brain, you need zinc, you need vitamin C, you need omega 3 fats, and a lot of people aren't getting that. The ratio of omega 6, which is a fat that is found in a lot of vegetable oils and meats, to omega 3, and the omega 6 fats actually cause inflammation. The omega 3s suppress it, is very high in this country. So we're eating way too much omega 6s in relation to omega 3 fats. And that is preventing full repair of the brain. And I mean, it also depends on the degree of injury. So let's say you had an acute injury, an acute injury that wasn't too bad. Maybe a small concussion, you're playing pee wee football, but then you start experiencing symptoms afterwards and you get put on a medication. And then that medication further disrupts neurotransmitter production. And now you've created a mental illness, but it was really just, some acute inflammation that probably would have lasted 1-2 months. But rather than support the body with some anti-inflammatory diet, anti-inflammatory supplements, we used a medication to alter neurotransmitters, and that medication further, depleted the body's ability to produce neurotransmitters properly. And so that could actually be an issue where, a small brain injury led to some symptoms that were, a couple of months long. This person went to the doctor, they got on the medication altered neurotransmitters, and the body cannot produce neurotransmitters properly anymore because they've been basically replaced artificially for so long through the medication that person now has neurotransmitter deficiencies and imbalances.
Wow, that's interesting. So maybe before we go on any further, what exactly is a neurotransmitter?
Okay, so dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, epinephrine. These are the basically signaling molecules in our brain. So when serotonin gets released from the storage compartments into the what's called the synapses, and it attaches to receptors, and it creates a calming effect. So all of these neurotransmitters are basically what uh, influence our mood, they influence our anxiety levels, they influence our relaxation levels. So they're very important to understand. And a lot of like for example, the main antidepressant medications, they're selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So what they do is they prevent serotonin from going back into its storage compartment, and that's great because it causes a higher degree of. So when the serotonin gets released, it stays at the active sites longer, and it creates a more prolonged effect. However, when you do that, your body starts to produce less serotonin in response over time. So if you use an SSRI, this selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, it can have positive effects in the short term, but in the long term, you're blunting your body's ability to produce serotonin. And that's why, some acute situations that lead to a prescription can end up leading to a chronic neurotransmitter imbalance that can cause mental health issues.
That's so interesting. I think I think it was Kelly Brogan on the Joe Rogan podcast, and she had a good analogy. She said, we think we can pull on one strand of the spider web, basically, without impacting the whole web. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
we don't, it's like we have forgotten that we're this like infinitely complex system of like just countless moving parts, and that we try to just drill into this one specific aspect of our physiology or our chemistry, and think that somehow that's not going to have like this ripple effect through the entire body.
Yeah, exactly. And so my philosophy is a little bit different. Pharmaceutical medications, they come in and they alter a receptor, or they add in a artificial neurotransmitter. What I want to do is figure out how we can support the body in doing that itself. So we can actually support the body in producing more serotonin by giving it the building blocks to produce serotonin, rather than, artificially modifying the receptor or the reuptake of that specific neurotransmitter.
That's so interesting. So on inflammation, before we go into like, what an anti-inflammatory diet is, what are some of the foods that cause inflammation? And And why do they cause inflammation? Because I'm actually not clear on that. I just know, obviously know that eating certain stuff is bad for you, but I don't think people understand, what specific mechanism it uses to cause inflammation. Because when I look at people, like I just as you're talking, I never really thought about this before, but I see people like dealing with some sort of arthritis at a young age, and I'm thinking, God, I wonder how that inflammation relates to not only their diet, but is that the same sort of source of that inflammation also causing issues with their like emotional health, emotional and mental health. It's like, because we are a system. So I have no idea how any of that works, or even if what I said is a possibility, but I just, so yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I actually would probably think you knew what you were talking about by these great questions. So, the reason that certain foods cause inflammation is because our body does not recognize them as foods. So we are now eating a diet that our body is completely this foreign to our body. So when we have fried foods, 200 years ago, fried foods didn't exist. So we take these fats. So now, for example, you go to a fast food restaurant, they are frying foods in vegetable oil. Now, vegetable oil didn't exist 200 years ago. That they're using some corn, soy-based vegetable oil. That's high. I mean, there's tons of pesticides in it. First of all, because those are mass-produced. Oftentimes, they're genetically modified. They are, just sprayed like crazy with pesticides. So we're using this concentrated oil from these vegetables, and they're high in this omega-6 fat, which is something that we couldn't ever get in the concentrations that we get it in from this oil. Then you take that oil and you heat it up. And when we heat up oils, some oils are more susceptible than others, but that specific vegetable oil is very susceptible to damage. These vegetable oils, when you heat them up, they become damaged, they become denatured. Now the structure of this molecule, so there's like this little molecule that usually goes in as a certain type of fat. Once it gets absorbed into our body, our immune system recognizes that as a pathogen. It's basically like anything else, like a bacteria or virus. Our immune system is like, let's get rid of this quickly. This is not something that we recognize as food or fuel. And the immune system gets activated. That's inflammation. So certain foods that cause inflammation mainly are going to be the foods that you didn't see 200 years ago. So the vegetable oils, especially when you fry foods, flours and sugars and artificial sweeteners and colors and those types of things. So mainly that's going to come from processed foods. When you eat natural foods, probably not going to cause much inflammation unless you're eating like, let's say, like a barbecued meat or smoked meat. That is a highly inflammatory, quote unquote, natural food.
Okay, that's really interesting. So another one is definitely sugar, and that's actually been in the news lately because it's like big tobacco, right? I mean, you find out 50 years ago that there was studies that showed sugar had a, I guess, direct link. It was a carcinogen, and it was suppressed, and now told not to eat fat, and blah blah blah. But I mean, I look at. I'm not sure. Is the tide turning a little bit in people's understanding that fat is not actually bad for you? Because I know that was one of the reasons that sugar got put into everything, is because we got told that we needed to eat a low-fat diet and you need to replace the taste with something. But are people waking up to the fact that maybe fat's not such a bad thing? Good fats?
Oh yeah, definitely. And but the issue now is that I think sometimes the extremes are what get publicized. So nowadays we have these people eating this ketogenic diet, which I mean, it can be very useful in certain cases, but the
Mm-hmm.
tide has turned a little bit too far, in my opinion, in where people think, oh, if it's fat, it's okay, which is not necessarily the case. So yes, definitely the tide is turning, but I mean, I think that's just a way that sensationalism sells, and I feel like the tide has turned a little bit too far on the other end in some cases. But yeah, we're definitely coming to the understanding that, I mean, just it's processed carbohydrates, processed fats. If you're eating processed foods, if you're eating foods that were created in a lab, they were created to sell a product and make money off you. They're not created for your health for the most part. There are some companies with integrity out there that are doing good things, but even then, they're if you take a tomato or a carrot and you alter it in any way, it's going to become less nutritious. It's going to, oftentimes they're going to alter it in a way where they're going to try to make it more desirable, because as a company, your goal is to sell more product. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to be an informed consumer and understand that, these foods, they're not designed to nourish you, they're designed to be sold to you. And if you understand that, you can have them in moderation, but you got to be aware of what is good for you. And oftentimes, unfortunately, you're going to have to do a lot of that information and studying on your own.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something else that is really interesting to me, especially when it comes to, I mean, not only mental health, but I guess that was the sort of the paradigm, or the thing that caused me to start thinking about this more and more, but is like, where we all have our own unique stories, we also are completely unique human beings. And like, this idea of N of one, medicine, for example, or N of one nutrition, where we are all very different. And one thing that, a specific food that impacts one person in a certain way won't necessarily impact another one. So is it possible that different people have foods that may cause inflammation, like in one person and not in another? And how can you tell if a food is impacting you negatively in that way?
Oh, you are asking the best questions, to be honest. Like, I feel like like all of this already, and you're just trying to tease it out of me. So, as far as like foods that cause inflammation, you can actually do what's called an IgG food sensitivity test, and that actually tells you what your immune system responds to. So that is a really great way to determine the foods that cause inflammation in your body. Another thing, specific body type. So if you're the type of person that puts on weight easily, and that, because I mean, there's different constitutions. We look at some people and they can eat whatever they want and they stay thin. That person, they need more carbs, and they'll be better off eating more rice and more carbs that are easy to absorb, because their body uses more energy, and carbs are an easily available source of energy. Now, the person that puts on weight very easily, they need less carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are going to be more inflammatory in their body. So there's definitely, everyone is different. My recommendation, if you want to take it to the point where you get the IgG test, that's great. I'm all for data, but I know that there are financial restrictions to that. That test usually costs about $300, and most of the time it's not covered by insurance. So that's a limitation there. But if you want to, ask your doctor. Your doctor might be able to order it, and it might be covered by insurance. So definitely recommend that, because that will tell you, depending on the lab, they look at between like 90 and over 100 different foods. And, some people, they respond negatively to blueberries, whereas in 99% of the population, blueberries are great. Now, another part, and we'll talk about this in a second, is there are some people that are going to basically have inflammation to almost every food that they eat. And that's because of a major gut dysfunction. Okay, so there are some people that will get an IgG test and 35 foods will show up as inflammatory. And if that's the case, your digestion is not functioning properly, and you are not breaking down your foods to the degree that they need to be broken down before they're absorbed into the bloodstream. And just as I mentioned earlier, when these foods that our body does not recognize get absorbed into the bloodstream, it causes an immune system response. Same thing happens when we can't digest our food properly. Proteins that are not fully broken down get absorbed into the bloodstream as proteins rather than as their individual amino acids, and they can cause an immune response. So healthy foods can cause inflammation in some people as well, what are quote unquote healthy foods. But yeah, it's definitely an individualized process. One of the things that I highly recommend, and I mean, I know some people, you're just getting started on this journey, and this is a lot of information. The first thing is just listen to your body. Start becoming more in tune with your body. Start paying attention to how the foods that you eat affect you, and you'll get an understanding of like, okay, when I have these specific foods, I don't feel my best, and you only get that understanding if you're on a journey to feel your best. Because if you're always eating junk, you're never going to feel your best. And I always say this, that most people don't know how good they're supposed to feel.
Yeah, that is so true. I think, it's even when that forgetting or not realizing how it could be is something I think that happens so much in our life. Like I remember when Cindy, my first wife, got sick. It's amazing. It had nothing to do with nutrition, but my point is, it's amazing how fast I forgot what quote normal even felt like. You know what I mean? Like we had this great life and things were going, and then it was gone, and it was amazing how fast I forgot how good that actually felt. And I think that can be, I think when you look at like nutrition and inflammation, you look at gradual deterioration as we accumulate damage and we become less mobile and we gain weight and blah blah blah, and we get older, like I think sometimes you don't even realize how far you've gone because it's so incremental. You don't ever take a step back and go, holy moly, man, look how far I am from where I could be.
Yeah, yeah, and it always comes back to the story where people are like, "Oh, I got diabetes out of nowhere. Oh, I had a heart attack out of nowhere." And it's like it wasn't out of nowhere. You just forgot how you were supposed to feel. It was a gradual process, and that's why I run one program. So I run several different programs. One of the programs that I run is a 28-day detox, where I mean it is super strict. And we're cutting out pretty much anything that causes inflammation in a portion of the population, and we're being really strict. And some people are like, "Oh, that's an extreme diet," and I'm like, that's the point. My goal is to show people how good they're supposed to feel. And it's not to say that you're going to maintain that diet for your whole life. But after 28 days, and you're like, wow, this is how I'm supposed to feel. Maybe I won't go back to the way that I was eating because, it's an eye opening experience. And even for myself, last time I ran that program was a couple of months ago. And, I even like, I followed the program and I was like, wow, the little knee pain that I have is completely gone now, and I can run and have no knee pain whatsoever. And now, right now, I actually just went on a run earlier, and I'm like, my knees are hurting a little bit. Like I need to get back into that 100% mindset. And it's not. I mean, there are ebbs and flows to the process, and to it's a journey throughout your life, and you're not always going to feel 100%. But I'm almost 31 years old, and I feel better than I have my entire life. And that's, I've always maintained a pretty good nutritional approach, but I'm constantly adding new things and experimenting, and I feel better than I ever have. I'm I'm just as athletic, just as strong, just as more energy than I've ever had. I just it's something that the concept of aging in our population, I think is, we get older and we deteriorate. And I mean, it's just completely out of whack. I don't think we should be 50, 60 years old and, dysfunctional. I think we should be till 80, and really still be able to get up and move around. And a lot of that is our lifestyle.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, I'm 44. I'll be 45 in April, and I feel the same way. I feel as good as I ever have, and I don't see any deterioration in my athletic performance at all. And yeah, I'm super optimistic about the future. But one thing that I noticed, though, talking about foods that cause inflammation, is, and I think maybe it is because like you say, there are ebbs and flows, man. Like there's times when I'm super healthy, and there's times when, let's say, it ebbs. And but what I notice is if I have a day where I just like pig the fuck out, eat everything on the sun, and believe me, I have those days, and it's usually like I flip the switch and I'm like, okay, this day's a write off, it's go time. But I actually wake up in the morning feeling hungover. Like it is, and I used to drink heavily, and I haven't done that in 3.5 years or whatever, but it is seriously like having a hangover.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like we didn't talk about this on the podcast, but I just got back from travel, some unexpected travel where I was, I was just kind of eating what was there. And usually when I travel, I just because there's not good options, I'll fast part of it. So I went one day, I almost ate nothing. I just had like, what did I have? Some fruit at one point with my son, and a cup of coffee. And that was almost all I had for about almost 20 hours. But then when I got my son back and, I was on the road, took him out to eat, had some pizza, then had another in the morning. There was a continental breakfast at the hotel and had some waffles, and that's where I feel the inflammation today. I definitely know when I went on that run, I'm like, wow, this is not how I feel normally. And it was just a couple of days, and but I know how I'm supposed to feel. I know I'm not supposed to feel like that, so it keeps me really I mean, not even necessarily motivated. It's just I know I got to go back to my baseline. Like I need to go back to what works for me and feel the way that I know I'm supposed to feel.
Yeah, and it's funny because even with the direct connection between nutrition and what goes on in your body, I mean, there's also the aspect like from an emotional, mental well-being perspective that knowing that you're doing your body good makes you feel good. You know what I mean? Regardless, like it makes you feel mentally good that I am treating this thing as this vessel, as it were, as a temple, and I think people can overlook that part of it too. So, but one thing I wanted to ask you about was two things that are quite contentious, and I think there's a lot of misinformation, and it's dairy and gluten. So I think a lot of people maybe think they're gluten intolerant, and maybe some people are, maybe some people aren't. I don't even really know, to be honest with you. But so I want to talk about that. And then for dairy, what's interesting is I'd be curious to know your point of view. Like, is all dairy bad, or is it more like the antibiotic hormone filled dairy that we get, at the supermarket? Is there a difference? How much of a difference is there between that and like, happy milk, let's say, organic, antibiotic hormone free milk?
Yeah. So it's funny. I got this question 3 times today. I don't know why. Like on social media, I got 2 people asking me about dairy. So dairy is, I mean, so clearly the one like you mentioned, the antibiotic and hormone pump cows that are sitting in a lot and are just sitting in their own feces and, and unwell and
Yeah.
that's definitely inflammatory. Like you should not be eating that. Now, if you're going to go to organic milk, yes, that's going to be better. That's not going to have the antibiotics. That's not going to have the hormones. However, that also is a pasteurized food. So when they pasteurize it, they put it at very high heats. That causes the fat molecules to become denatured, like I mentioned earlier. So that can be problematic as well. And then also the proteins in dairy, so the wheat in or the whey in the casein, are two of the most common IgG food sensitivities. So if you do an IgG test, like I mentioned a second ago, the casein is number one, and then whey is also up there as well. So for most people, I don't recommend dairy. Now, if you have a cow in your backyard or your neighbor does, and you're milking it and you know how you're supposed to feel, you know that you feel well, and you've experimented with adding and removing dairy in your diet, um, and you feel great with dairy, it can be very nutritious if you're getting it from that source. It's going to have some good bacteria. It's going to have some pretty good medium chain fats. It's going to have what's called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, which can help our metabolism. So a high quality, unpasteurized raw milk dairy, if you don't have a food sensitivity, is can be beneficial. But I mean, who's doing that? Almost no one.
Yeah. Well, so here, I'll tell you something funny. I don't know where it's like where you live, but here in Ontario and Canada, raw milk, man, it's like heroin. Like, fuck. It's like, I don't, I think they think that the mindset is like raw milk, it's going to kill you because it's not pasteurized. So like at the kids' school where my kids, people there's lots of people we know that drink raw milk, but it's like this underground thing.
Yeah, that's how it is here in the US
It's
too.
crazy, man.
That is the milk industry. So the milk industry is very
Yeah.
powerful. And if you look at the United States guidelines for food, and I used to, so when I did my PhD, I did my PhD in nutrition. I mean, we were supposed to teach from the guidelines, which is a cup of milk per day. I didn't. I actually created a program that we used to teach in communities, and I recommended against drinking milk at the probably not something that our funders were happy about because it was working on a grant from the American Heart Association. But that is not something that is available here as well. It's something that I mean, I used to, so I've experimented with raw milk as well, and I've just found out that milk doesn't work for me. But I've experimented with raw milk as well, and it's an underground thing, and that's the problem is, money plays a very large part in politics, and food companies, the dairy industry, the meat industry, the wheat industry when it comes to gluten, and we'll talk about that in a second, all have a very powerful lobbies in Washington, and probably the same in Canada as well.
Oh, very much so. Very, very much so. So, yeah. So let's move to gluten because that is a another topic. I think there's a lot of misinformation around. So, and I guess what I'm interested in is what is it, and is the whole idea of gluten insensitivity, like, is that something? What I'm interested about is how, sort of inflammatory is gluten in general, but how much of our traditional Western diet makes gluten even more inflammatory, if that's even true at
Yeah,
all.
yeah. So, I mean, with regard to the traditional Western diet, it's mainly just the way that the wheat is produced. So most of the wheat is just sprayed highly with pesticides, glyphosate, and other pesticides that can cause negative effects in the body. But and when I again, this goes back to when I was doing my PhD, I was taught that like gluten. This was when this gluten free craze was going on, and all the professors in my program, they're like, no, there's nothing wrong with gluten, blah blah blah, and I believed it at that point. But now 7 years later, I've been doing a lot of reading, and over the last, and this is, I mean, it's new information, so I don't discredit anyone who's teaching old information, but when over the last 8 years or so, there's been a lot of papers published on gluten and its effects on our gastrointestinal tract. And what gluten does is it actually activates a protein called zonulin. So don't get caught up in all the fancy words, but gluten is just a protein in wheat and other grains, and they activate this other protein in our gut called zonulin. That protein in our gut causes the gut wall to open up. So normally this is a sealed. So the gut basically is the barrier between the outside of our body, everything we bring in as food, and the inside. So it's supposed to act as like the gatekeeper. It's supposed to keep things that aren't supposed to be in our bloodstream out of our bloodstream. We have a lot of immune cells there. We have all of our enzymes that break down food. So we want to keep that seal closed. Well, gluten opens it up. So it can be problematic. And when that seal is opened, there's chronic inflammation. If your gut is leaking, if that seal is not, if there's permeability there, you will be chronically inflamed. That will lead to autoimmune diseases, and that will have psychological effects. 100% of the time, that's going to have a psychological effect.
Wow, that is super
So, but
interesting.
I want to go into context with that. So, eating gluten
Yeah.
one time isn't going to cause that. It's only
Sure.
going to happen more so if gluten's a part of your normal diet. That's probably going to be one of those side effects.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. So I've also heard people say, and I've only heard this recently, but that apparently, I don't know if you know anything about this, but there's a difference between the bread we have in North America and the bread we have in Europe. Do you know anything about why that would be?
Pesticides and regulations. So they're not allowed to spray the same
Oh.
pesticides that we are. That's the difference. So the United States
Oh.
has
Okay.
some of the most lax, and I'm not sure about Canada. I'm not as well versed with Canadian rules and how the FDA or whatever your guys' food regulation body works there. But in the United States, it's so controlled by food companies that we have very lax laws, and they're allowed to put almost anything in our food. We basically have to prove, somebody has to go out and prove that this food is harmful with clinical research trials to get it off the market. And Europe is a lot more. They're just a lot more strict on that stuff. Um, the United States is not.
Interesting. I remember reading a book and it was talking about how, it's like this with every industry where there's regulation, but how there's just like a revolving door, whether it's in like the Treasury Department between, the Wall Street executives become, high ranking members of the Treasury Department. They rotate back and forth, and like Monsanto and the FDA. And it's just like this crazy revolving door of like incestuous, not having people's best interest in mind. So yeah, I hear you. And it's the same here. Absolutely. It's the same here. So, one thing, so we talked about gut health. Now, this is something I'm kind of super passionate about because everybody that watches, follows me on Facebook or whatever knows that I'm like this kombucha freak. And I brew my own, but I'm really interested in the idea of gut health. And I know that there is been, I think relatively new research that shows, like there's quite a powerful connection between your sort of gut flora and the health of your gut bacteria and mental health. So maybe talk to us about what's actually going on in our gut, because I don't know if people even know what that is, like the whole bacteria in the gut, what it does, and how we keep it healthy and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
so I'm looking forward to jumping into this, but let me preface this by saying that the information that I'm providing I mean, the research is so new. None of
Uh-huh.
this was understood 10 years ago, and we are barely scratching the surface. So a lot of what I'm saying is
Hmm.
just, it is new, cutting edge, and we don't know very much about it. So I'm going to speak in a little bit of generality in some cases, but that's just because of,
Okay.
just where we're at. So, gut health is extremely important. So, over 80% of our serotonin, which is one of the neurotransmitters that produces like happiness, is produced in our gut. Now, that actually doesn't go to our brain, but it has effects in our gut. It helps with gut motility. And there are some people that believe that, that does have mood based effects. Now, we don't know that for sure at this point. But that's one of the things. Another thing is GABA. So certain types of bacteria in the gut can actually influence GABA receptors in the brain. So GABA is another one of those neurotransmitters that just makes us feel chill, relaxed, and certain types of bacteria can increase those receptors in the brain. So if we have a dysfunction in our bacteria, if we have just an imbalance of healthy bacteria in the gut, that can cause problems. And again, when generality here, because we have 100 trillion microbes in our gut, so bacteria and yeast. So they outnumber our human cells by 10 times. And we have, I think, at this point, discovered multiple hundreds of different strains of bacteria, strains of yeast. And we're just starting to uncover like this specific strain does this specific strain does that. And that is new. That is within the last 10 years. You will not find a GI specialist who was trained in or who hasn't been doing his reading, reading a lot of books recently that's going to have any information on this. It is just it's really new stuff. So that being said, when we have a imbalance in our gut, which can be caused by multiple things. So things that can cause an imbalance is poor diet. Obviously, that will cause a shift in our gut bacteria. So when we're eating processed carbs, that that can feed the bacteria that are more pathogenic, the bacteria that we do not want to be basically overgrown in our digestive tract. So a diet of processed carbohydrates is one thing that can lead to a bacterial or yeast overgrowth over time. Antibiotics is literally one of the most important things, and in this society where every time you get a cold or a flu and you get go to the doctor and they give you an antibiotic, it's causing major problems in a lot of people. There was a study published about 3 years ago that showed that people who have taken, I think it was 3 or more courses of antibiotics, have a 50% higher rate of depression and of anxiety. And that's because of how it's influencing gut bacteria. And again, like I said, this is all new stuff, so this is not something that you're going to see very often talked about. And you really, if you're taking an antibiotic, you have to be really aware of how that's going to affect your gut bacteria. You have to be really cognizant of it's going to kill off your bacteria, and it's going to leave you susceptible to yeast overgrowth. And a lot of people have heard of candida. That's one of the big issues. You take an antibiotic and you create candida overgrowth, essentially, especially if you take multiple courses. And that's going to cause that candida basically is eating the food that your other bacteria is supposed to be eating. It's causing massive imbalance in your digestive tract. You're not able to digest food properly. You're not able to absorb the right nutrients, the nutrients that you need as the building blocks for your neurotransmitters. You're getting amino acids that are not fully digested and broken down, being absorbed into your bloodstream, and from multiple different levels that can affect psychological health. So this is one of the really important ones. If you're dealing with anxiety, if you're dealing with depression, and you also have digestive issues, if you deal with constipation, diarrhea, frequent bloating, and heartburn, those types of things, this is where you probably need to start. I would recommend just starting here, going in and working on your gut, trying to fix your gut, and that's going to be the first place, and that could clear up everything.
Wow, that is powerful. So how do we do that, right? So we talked about, I mean, we talked about kombucha a little bit. So that's fermented, it's fermented sweet tea. But I think the idea of fermented foods, for example, sauerkraut, kimchi, like all that kind of stuff. Like, what is it about those specific types of the fermented foods, say, that help us, nurture, I guess, gut health?
So when the foods naturally ferment and create those bacteria, those are beneficial for our gut health. The problem is, though, depending on how far down the line you are, those can actually not help at all. So when you
Oh,
think
really?
about having like kombucha or anything like that, it's a drop in an ocean. Basically, you're having a couple of billion
Okay.
microbes go into your gut in a where there's 100 trillion, and if there's a massive overgrowth going on there, it might provide a small amount of relief, but it's really not going to fix the problem at all. And I've had a lot of people. I mean, I've become somewhat of a specialist in this gut health thing just because it's so new and I know a little bit about it. So I have a lot of people with major gut dysfunction who are coming to me and with autoimmune diseases, and I'm helping them, kind of fix it. But the first thing you got to do, if you really are, if you're experiencing some of the symptoms that I mentioned, massive bloating every time you eat, a lot of inflammation, potentially an autoimmune disease, some psychological issues, so low energy, maybe hypothyroid or inflammation like arthritis, colitis, Crohn's, IBS, any of those, you are probably going to want to first wipe out everything in there. So you can do that. And the first thing, I mean, so you can test, and I always recommend testing if you can afford it. So you can do what's called an organic acids test, and that will tell you your colony. It'll give you an indication of what's going on in there. So that's the first thing you can do if it works for your budget. If not, what you can do, and this is relatively harmless, is go in and just wipe it all out. So you can use some natural supplements, some antibacterial and anti-yeast supplements, along with some what are called biofilm disruptors. They're enzymes that break down polysaccharides. Because what happens is when these specific pathogenic microbes overgrow, like Candida, what it will do is create like a protective layer to protect it from the immune system and to protect it from antifungals. And it'll create like this mucus layer around it to protect it, and because it's trying to stay alive, just like any other organism. These pathogenic organisms are trying to stay alive. So we have to use some enzymes that disrupt the biofilm, along with some antifungals, along with some antibacterials, and you can do this from a completely natural perspective. You don't need any pharmaceutical medications. Now, pharmaceutical meds can help, but you have to really identify: is it yeast? Is it bacteria? And I've done that. I mean, I really focus on an integrative approach. If someone wants to do pharmaceuticals, perfectly fine with me. But let's make sure that we know exactly what we're doing, and make sure we're targeting the problem. So you have to basically wipe it out and then repopulate it. So the kombucha and fermented foods come in great handy during step two. But during step one, the main goal is getting it all out. So step one, wipe as much as you can out. You can't completely sterilize your gut, but what we can do is basically suppress all of the colonies in there, and then we go in and repopulate it with the beneficial strains, and use a very high content of probiotics, 50 billion to 100 billion strain, and then repopulate that. Along with that, you have to focus on diet. So when you're wiping it out, you don't want to use antifungals and antibacterials and these biofilm disruptors while also eating foods that are going to continue to grow the colonies. So basically, in that case, you go on a low carbohydrate diet for that period of time, and you wipe it out. You don't give them the food that they need, these carbohydrates, these fermentable carbs. And then once we start to repopulate it, we start to incorporate the fibers and the carbohydrates that are going to help the colonies that we want to grow regrow. And then after that, we have to basically repair the gut lining. So we got to use a supplement with glutamine, with zinc carnosine, and those two nutrients are very important for helping to repair the gut lining. You can also use what's called DGL and aloe vera. And I don't want to get into too much detail about all the specifics, but there's a couple of different supplements that I use that have all of these different components, and they help to repair the gut lining. Because if you've had like a yeast overgrowth or a bacterial overgrowth for a period of time, you probably have some damage in your gut lining, and we need to fix that. So you can wipe out the bacteria and you can repopulate it, but if there's still a leaky gut going on, then you're not going to be able to fully resolve the problem.
Wow, that is so fascinating, man. And it's interesting because I think what I wanted to touch on too about the bacteria and the antibiotics, and you might have people who say, "Yeah, well, that's interesting, but I haven't really, taken antibiotics in a long time, or maybe not at all." But I heard a really interesting stat a little while ago. And I don't remember the specific number, but it was super crazy. Like 93% of all antibiotics used are used in the industrial production of meat.
Yeah, no, it's about I believe it's about 70%.
Yeah.
I think I've done about 10 shows on on my podcast that I've kind of covered a lot of these different topics, like the leaky gut, the antibiotics, because this is a pervasive issue that it's just going unnoticed. Like all of my clients have been pushed from doctor to doctor, have been put on SSRIs and different psychotropic medications, have been put on things to relax their immune system. And it's like, why is their immune system active? Like, why is it active in the first place? Let's figure out why it's active, rather than just like, hey, let's shut their immune system down, and then they get sick all the time. Then we put them on more antibiotics, and then they're not able to produce neurotransmitters properly. So let's go ahead and replace those. And now we have someone on 7 medications that will never get better. I am a huge proponent of really kind of waking up people to this understanding of this is not something that we need to be doing. Antibiotics or we can use other things. There are natural antibiotics: grapefruit seed extract, oregano oil. There's so many garlic, so many natural antibiotics that are very effective. And the other part is like, and this is a study published by the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, is that 40% of antibiotic use is for non-bacterial infections. So they're prescribing antibiotics for infections that are viral or fungal in nature. The antibiotic does nothing. It does absolutely nothing but hurt the immune system. And then you have these people who have taken antibiotics almost pointlessly, and then now they have yeast overgrowth because of an antibiotic they took that didn't even help them. And it's like, how about we support the body from internally? Let's support the immune system. Let's use immune system boosting nutrients when you get a cold or when you get a flu or an infection. And let's use natural supplements like the supplements that I mentioned earlier, grapefruit seed extract and oregano oil. They are the great thing about natural stuff. It's amazing. So they're antibiotic, antifungal, and antiviral. So no matter what it is, they're going to help, and they're not as strong. So they're helping, but we're also supporting the body internally and using vitamin C, zinc, and these things. Maybe some mushroom extracts to help the immune system do its job.
My wife, whenever I don't feel well, she makes me take, she's like a good witch. I would say she's got all these, tinctures and oils and all this stuff. And whenever I'm not feeling well, she makes me take oregano oil. Whew, that stuff burns going down,
yeah,
man.
That's why I use grapefruit seed extract instead. My go-to is the grapefruit seed extract because the oregano oil is kind of rough. And I use it with my son a lot. Like he actually just got back pretty much every time he goes with his mom because his diet's a lot different. And he comes back with a little bit of a cold. And he even knows. I asked him this morning, I said, what are we going to take today? And he knows exactly what we take now, because a couple times a year, probably 3 or 4 times a year, I put him on this regimen. Anytime I see any indication that he's getting sick, his vitamin C consumption goes up to about 1 to 2 grams per day. His zinc consumption goes up to about 45 milligrams per day. And then he's getting a little bit of grapefruit seed extract throughout the day.
Awesome. So let's talk about, this is like we talked earlier, right? Everybody's unique, but let's talk about, say somebody comes in and they come to see you, and, they're dealing with, say, depression or anxiety, and they're doing all like the other stuff, right? Like, so I'm exercising and I'm talking to somebody about my feelings and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it's, but so when they come to you and they say, okay, I feel like I need some support from a nutritional perspective. What is the process that you walk them through?
So first, I have them fill out like a symptom questionnaire, and that's gonna tell me what's going on. So if I see that on the digestive health they checked 5 boxes where they're having digestive problems, that's where we're starting. If I see that they're having other neurological issues, I'm probably going to lean more towards the anti-inflammatory approach. So we're just going to go on an anti-inflammatory diet, probably use a couple of anti-inflammatory supplements like fish oil and turmeric, and see if that helps. The other part is if they're able to, if they're financially able to, and testing is going to cost 300 to 600, $900. Each test is about $300. If they're financially able to do it, I'm going to do some testing and really identify what the issue is, because other things that can cause problems, cause inflammation in the brain, buildup of heavy metals. So if you had exposure to mercury, had exposure to too much aluminum, those things can also be a problem, which really hard to identify, and you can't identify it in the blood. Doctors will, sometimes draw blood and test that. It's not in the blood. It's stored in certain tissues. So that's where a big problem is. The blood only tells so much. There's a lot more information that can be gleaned from urine, from hair that we need to look into. So it really depends on the individual. If they don't have the funds to do any testing, we're gonna go straight to. I'm just gonna really do a really comprehensive questionnaire, and then from there we're gonna do some trial and error, and I'm gonna try to identify first what I think the most prominent cause is, and then we're gonna go, anti-inflammatory diet. We're gonna maybe try to wipe out any type of bacteria and repopulate the gut, and then go from there and see what happens. But the other thing is, I'm gonna use some supplements to support their brain and to support neurotransmitters. So we're going to use a B complex. We're probably going to use something like 5-HTP, which is basically a precursor for serotonin. So it is called 5-hydroxytryptophan. So that basically, when it goes into your brain, it just needs one step to be converted, and B6 is what creates that step. So if we use a B vitamin plus 5-HTP, which some of the supplements that I use have those together, that can really do wonders for mood.
That's amazing. So why don't we? I think one thing that probably a lot of people feel like is like, all this seems so overwhelming, or I am so far gone that I feel like I'm beyond hope, or I don't know where to start, or it just seems overwhelming. So you talked earlier about your 28-day detox. So without going into the specifics, we'll link to or let people know how they can find out more about that in the show notes. But what kind of results do you see with people after they go through this 28-day program of yours?
Oh man, so I mean, I had last time. So the detox, I add in a couple of nutrients, or a couple of supplements. So we use basically a liver supplements to boost liver function, because the liver is what detoxes your body. And a lot of people say, well, the liver does its job no matter what. No, we can ramp up the liver's ability to do its job by giving it certain nutrients. So that's what I do in this program. And a couple of almost everyone loses weight if that's what they were looking to do. But I get things like, oh, my skin feels better. I wake up with so much more energy. I don't need coffee anymore. My hair feels better. I can tell that my nails are growing more quickly. And it's just because I use a multivitamin as well as a liver detox supplement. We're correcting nutritional deficiencies with the multivitamin, and then we're really getting out some of these toxins that build up over time. And the thing is, when you're eating certain foods, and I mean, we live in a society where we're exposed to 77,000 man-made chemicals on a daily basis. So everything that you're doing, you're going to be exposed to chemicals. And that's the thing, is like people say that our liver is meant to detoxify our body. It is, but we need to give it some support, because right now I'm sitting in a room where there's paint on the wall, and that paint is, there's man-made chemicals that are not supposed to be absorbed into my body. And maybe you think the paint's just sitting on the wall, but there are small molecules coming from that paint that I'm breathing in. And so there's so many other factors that, like, we need to every once in a while support our body in really cleaning itself out. So just, I mean, the effects are really dramatic. But if you have enough interest, because I mean, I'm all about group programs because I love the support, and it allows me to basically spread out. I can write a 15-page ebook talking about all the specifics. I can give people the formula on how to not necessarily self-diagnose, but really identify what might be their own problems, and then I can give support and be in the Facebook group or whatever type of group that we create and really help guide people along. So if you have an audience with enough individuals who would be interested and we could do that, I mean, I'd be open to doing something in 2018 where we do like a where I put together a list of supplements that might help, and this is how you can reduce inflammation. This is how we can really support neurotransmitter production, and this is how we can fix the gut, and maybe put together a program where we can help people use nutrition to help support from this aspect.
Oh man, that would be awesome. So, yeah, what else? There was one other thing I wanted to ask you. Oh yeah, so I have this problem where I consume a freaking ridiculous amount of caffeine. Like, and it's mostly through green tea. I have this like totally compulsive personality, and it's funny. The last podcast episode I did was with an author talking about people who are driven and how they are genetically wired to be a certain way, and one of the side effects of these having this superpower is that they tend towards addictive, like sort of compulsive personalities. So I don't even know how many freaking cups of green tea. It's just stupid. But what is the impact of caffeine on, I guess, the body and our mental, emotional health? Like, how much benefit do you think I might get from just weaning myself off of it completely?
So caffeine actually doesn't. I mean, there's actually positive effects of caffeine for overall health and longevity.
Okay.
But that all, like you said, the end of one thing, that all depends on the person. So if you're the type of person that
Mhm.
has anxiety already, probably best to stay away from caffeine, or at least try to wean yourself off and see how you feel. I'm similar to you. I have that type of driven, obsessive personality, and for me, I don't have any. I mean, I'm a very like laid back person, and drinking a lot of caffeine doesn't really affect me. Now, every once in a while, and I do this with everything in my life, I definitely experiment and I'll wean myself off for a short period of time to see how I feel, if I feel better, if it has a positive effect on my life. But if it doesn't, which it doesn't, when I go off of coffee for a couple of weeks at a time, and I'm like, I don't really think that has that much of a positive effect on my life. I'll go back on it, and it's not. It really, caffeine is really individualized. But if you, I mean, I know a lot of people listening to this are dealing with anxiety. I mean, it activates the nervous system, and we want to keep our nervous system balanced. We want to do things. If you are dealing with anxiety, you want to do things that calm the nervous system. So caffeine is definitely not going to be one of those things that helps to calm the nervous system. So I would definitely recommend in that case to really experiment and get off of caffeine and see how it feels in your body. See if you experience some positive effects from getting off of it. But I mean, just generally speaking, coffee and green tea, you're going to have positive effects. They are nutritious, and the caffeine really isn't like something that's going to be harmful.
Yes, you have just. I'm
Yeah.
gonna go as soon as we get off. I'm going to brew another green tea. Uh, no, that's awesome, brother. So, listen, man, that was a ton of information, and I guess what I want people to take away from it is that there is a huge connection, like as if it needs to be said anymore, but I mean a huge connection between our, nutrition and emotional and mental well-being, and we need to, when we're striving for optimal health and even healing, whether it's from trauma or whatever, we need to include nutrition as part of that program. We can't overlook that, right? So, I mean, before I let you go and get more information about how people can get in touch with you, is there any parting words of wisdom you'd like to share, or anything we
I
haven't
think you
covered?
got it, man. Nutrition is the most important medicine from a preventative perspective and from a treatment perspective. You can really heal your body, and you can go back to my story. I healed a stomach ulcer, which is almost like an uncurable thing for the most part by conventional medicine, but I did it in a couple of weeks, and the power of nutrition is really underestimated. So definitely take the information, follow, and we'll talk about where to find me and things like that. But really take that and really run with it. Just like Jason said, you can do so much from a healing perspective with nutrition, and really it's just a self care. Like you said earlier, it's just you know it's a part of caring for your body. And when you do that, there's a positive psychological effect that comes with that. It's like I'm taking care of myself. It's just like, doing yoga or anything like that, where you're focusing on caring for yourself, which is always beneficial.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to leave it. And I appreciate it, man. Oh, one thing I wanted to ask you too is how's
Oh,
podcast
it's
going?
going great. So I do a daily or the Monday through Friday podcast. Try to keep it between 10 and 15 minutes, and it's exploding. I've actually had, what is it? I just reached 10,000 downloads, and I think 1,000 in the last like week, which is awesome.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
So it's exploding right now. I'm looking forward to 2018 and trying to get prepared because I expect it to keep growing. I mean, this is I know I've had a lot of people reach out to me and they're like, I love what you're doing and I can just tell you care. And it's like, I didn't do it for money. It's not about money for me. It's,
Yeah.
I intend to make a lot of money so I can spread the message and really keep it going. But, for me, it's a passion. I want to help people really improve their health from this natural perspective. And a lot of times, you're just not, the resources aren't there. And you can just tune into the podcast, and what I always say is like, if you subscribe to my podcast and if you listen to it for a year, you're going to get 250-ish episodes, and you're going to be the most informed person in your circle, and you're going to have the tools and resources to be able to take care of your body.
Absolutely. I can't recommend what you're doing highly enough. And isn't it amazing to think about? Like, I always tell people, like, I'll take a picture of my little laptop here and my microphone, and it's like with, a little amount of equipment, all you need is some knowledge and some passion and a willingness to, or desire to connect with people. You can broadcast to the entire world, man. It's just freaking, I love it so
Yeah,
much.
it is awesome. Like so I used to teach at the university, and teaching is a passion of mine. I was actually, before I started my podcast, I was looking to get back into teaching. I was like, you know what, I want to teach. I want to get back in and just teach. And but I knew that what I was going to be teaching wasn't what I want to teach. So the podcast has given me that
Mm.
outlet to be able to teach, because I read 2 to 3 hours a day, like on average. Like I try to get, my goal is to just really know as much as I possibly can. So when someone comes to me, I can point them in the right direction. And I want to teach that. I don't want to just consume it. I want to teach it. I want to use it. And the podcast gives me that outlet. And now I'm having people come to me, just like what I was mentioning with the group about, like, putting together a group on mental health. Like I've had people come to me like, hey, I'm interested in a group on, or I'm interested in learning more about this specific topic. And that is really guiding me in, like, okay, next year I'm creating courses. I actually run interestingly enough, it's completely out of this. I run a personal training certification training course, which is, so people who are getting certified as a
Hmm.
personal trainer. I know the materials are very difficult. It's a lot of textbooks for a specific certification from American College of Sports Medicine. So I created a course a long time ago to help people get certified. And now I'm having them come to me like, hey, I need, I've seen your stuff. I need help on nutrition. I'm like, whoa, I'm going to start teaching personal trainers how to use nutrition with their clients, because they don't learn that. So, I mean, I see my career as just, I'm going to be a teacher. Like, I want to do three things. I want to learn, I want to teach, and I want to apply. And that's, I mean, it's what I love to do. And, I can do it all day.
I was just thinking as you were talking, it would be really cool too, because what I'm really interested in, I used to be like, I dabbled in personal training too, but what I am really interested in is the emotional aspect of how that plays into optimal physical performance, because I looked at myself and I always, I always had this idea that I just got to push myself harder in the gym and all that kind of stuff. And then I actually started developing myself like emotionally and mentally and spiritually. And I was like, and just by default, I got fitter than I had ever been in my life, despite the fact that I had been working out, because I started making different choices and I was approaching the day from a different point of view. And I was just thinking, as you were talking, it would be really cool to create something together where, we could provide personal trainers with this whole different arsenal of information, like to be more than just the person that teaches them how to do a squat.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's, I mean, I'm all for it. I think that personal trainers, that's one of the reasons I created this course too, is like, I think that personal trainers are, they're the gateway a lot of times. They're the person that
Hmm.
someone's turning to for all of their alternative health information. So they go to a doctor, and the doctor is giving them the pharmaceutical medications, but a lot of times the only other person that they have, as far as like a practitioner is concerned, is personal trainer. So I definitely think that they can be more well equipped. One of my goals from when I was a youngster, about 8 years ago, and it's still what I want to do, is create some wellness facilities. Once I really master the online game, I want to create a wellness facility. I'm here in Austin right now, so probably here first. But where I train the trainers to really be an overall holistic coach. So they're training people, but they also know the nutrition. They're just an all around resource, because the personal training certifications, unfortunately, they're very limited. They don't learn too much.
Hmm.
Even with regards to training, they don't learn enough, I don't believe, for what they're doing, because a lot of times, someone who has anxiety, or someone who is depressed, or someone who has type 2 diabetes or high cholesterol is going to that trainer, and the trainer is not qualified to be able to work with them properly.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, man. Well, hey, listen, this was freaking amazing, and I'd love to have you back on because I feel like we could talk for hours. But what is the best way? And I wanted to clarify before you give all your contact information. You work with people from around the world, so I don't want people to think that they need to be in Austin, Texas, in order to be able to work
Oh
with you. Is
yeah,
that right?
definitely. So I do Skype and online work as well. And you can find me through social media. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Adrian C PhD. And through Instagram, it's Dr. Adrian Chavez. So those are two places where, I mean, if you send me a message, I can connect with you. I will get back to you. Sometimes it might be a couple of day delay because I get a lot of messages, but I do make time to get back to everyone that I possibly can. And then my website, Dr. Adrian Chavez, it's undergoing an overhaul right now, but you can see there's a couple of buttons on there to book a consultation with me, and find out some contact information there. You can also just, I mean, if you want to send me a direct email at drdachavez31@gmail.com, and you can just reach out directly to me. If you just have a couple of questions here and there, I have no problem just taking some time and answering that.
That is awesome, brother. And I wanted to let people know too, if they want to get in touch with me, it's facebook.com/Jason PhD, except I only went to community college. So it just makes me feel smart. Now, listen,
The
brother,
other thing I
thank
forgot to
you
mention,
so much for
I
including
don't want to
all.
sorry to
Oh,
interrupt
yeah,
you,
your
the
podcast.
podcast. Yeah, I completely forgot about that. We referenced
Yeah.
it multiple times, and so the podcast is called Your Nutrition Prescription, and you can find that on Google Play and Stitcher, and on Apple as well. So definitely go check that out. I do recommend that one. I'm getting a lot of great feedback, and I'm committed to continuing this and trying to provide as much value as I possibly can through that.
Yeah, that is awesome. Well, listen. Oh, okay. One more question. Have you had any haters yet?
Yes, I have. I think it's kind of funny though. A lot of times it's doctors, and
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
so
Interesting.
they're like, oh, this is not true. I had someone really they oh so I did a video on cancer with another doctor. We did a live video on Facebook, and I think it got like 15,000 views or something. And there was a couple of doctors that reached out, and they're like, you guys are doing harm. And I'm like, no, you're doing harm. We're actually trying to help people. I mean,
Yeah,
like there's a time and place for both things, and I'm completely open
of
minded. I
course.
don't think that, like, oh, this is the only way to go. And it's interesting. I had actually another one too, that on Facebook, that she's made a comment, and then I responded to her comment, and I mean, I try to be as open minded as possible, and she actually started following me and started interacting with me afterwards. It was funny because she was like, I
There
think
you
that
go.
the information they're giving is dangerous, and then I responded in the most I was just trying to be unbiased. Everything I try to do is going to be based on research. I'm not just saying stuff to say it. I've read at least 400 books. I've read at least 2,500 research papers. Like, I try to give the most unbiased information that is science based. And if someone has, if someone's coming from a different perspective and has a different information, I'm open to hearing it. But I want them to you know, bring the science behind it. Tell me exactly why. Show me the evidence behind what you're saying, and I'll do the same. And if you have a better argument, I'm open to changing my mind.
I love it. I love it. Well, hey, listen, thanks so much for coming on the show and taking the time, man. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I can't wait to release it into the wild and have people hear your voice and your message and benefit
Oh
from what
man,
you
I
have to
really
say.
appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.
Okay, brother. Take care. And there you have it. Tons and tons of information to help you make more informed nutritional choices and start living a healthier, more optimal life, and starting to actually work on some of your mental and emotional health issues from the inside out. So I hope you enjoyed the show. I know I did, and I love talking to Adrian. He's a great guy. He's super knowledgeable, and he is committed to serving other people, which are all of the characteristics I happen to love in people, which is why I love doing this podcast so much. But I'm going to end this episode like I end every single episode, which is by saying, listen, if you've fucking struggled, I have struggled too. Fuck, all right? I've struggled too. And if you ever want to talk to me, I want you to know that I will not judge you, okay? And I would encourage you, especially around this holiday time of the year, where there's people who maybe are struggling, maybe more than they would be otherwise, I want you to remember that you have the gift of giving them a safe place to be open and to form some human connection. Because human connection requires two people, but it only requires one person to go first. So be that person. You could change somebody's life, and you could change somebody's life today and forever, which is pretty fucking cool when you think about it. All right, so we will see you next time on the Mental Health Warriors podcast, and thank you so much for listening.